A glimpse of what going on holiday in some parts of Europe will look like this summer. Barriers separating sun loungers on the Greek island of Santorini. Not the beach experience that most holiday makers are used to, but one that complies with new social distancing rules.
We hope these barriers won't be the future for beaches. We don't want this. But if this is necessary, and if people's safety depends on this sort of device, then so be it. We just want to work. We want to get going.
In March, borders in the European Union were shut and nearly all travel stopped because of the coronavirus pandemic. A huge blow to the tourism industry, one of the bloc's main economic sectors. As some countries begin to ease their lockdowns, the European Commission has presented a rescue plan for the tourism industry. It's recommending vouchers instead of refunds for cancelled travel, sanitary measures for hospitality and transport services, and the reopening of some borders.
Of course, this is not going to be a normal summer, not for any of us. But when we all work together and we all do our part in the ways the Commission is setting out today, then we don't have to face a summer struck at home or a completely lost summer for the European tourist industry.
Some countries say that they are already considering lifting some travel restrictions. Germany says that it wants to reopen its border with France, Switzerland and Austria. And Britain and France say that they won't impose quarantine for now on people travelling between their two countries. Paris is one of the world's most visited cities. The lockdown's been eased, but monuments, museums, hotels and restaurants remain closed. The French government has advised people to holiday in France this year. After 2 months at home, some people can't wait to travel.
Not so worried about the health risk, and I really waited to be able to travel abroad and outside France.
I have a holiday home in Spain and want to go, but for now there are restrictions, but I want to go. We can't stop living.
More than 6 million tourism jobs in the EU could be lost unless the industry is revived. The European Commission says the challenge is to encourage the sector's recovery, but prevent a resurgence of coronavirus cases or risk it spreading even further across the bloc.
And Natacha's joining us now. Natacha, one of the problems appears to be getting some sort of comprehensive plan for Europe for this.
Well, I think one of the main issues is it's not really a one-size-fits-all problem, because you have different member states in the European Union that have been affected in different ways by the coronavirus pandemic. The Czech Republic, for example, had very low infection rate, low cases, but then a country like France, we've had more than 26,000 people have died. So the issue for the European Commission today, when they presented their so-called rescue plan for the tourism industry, is really, they said these are just proposals, these are guidelines, because they know that it's impossible to come up with one plan that's going to fit all the member states. Now, some of those proposals were the reopening of borders according to whether countries feel that it is safe enough for them to be able to do that, and also putting in place a voucher system. So if you had booked travel at the moment in the European Union during the coronavirus pandemic, you had a right for a full refund. Now, what the European Commission is saying to travel operators and travel services is, look, try and encourage customers to take a voucher instead, because then, of course, they will travel in the future. You get to keep the money, and that's just better economically for the European Union. But as I said, it's very difficult to impose one plan on the whole bloc, because the bloc's experience of the coronavirus pandemic is very different.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned before was the fact, of course, that this is rather a proposal. It's not something that is enforceable. But why do you think the European Commission is so anxious to suggest this at this point, given the fact that there are still strains of the virus around in Europe?
Yes, the coronavirus crisis is, of course, far from over in the European Union. In countries like here in France, there are still restrictions in place, even though the lockdown is being eased. But what the European Commission is saying is that as the infection rates do drop, as lockdowns are being eased, then the tourism sector needs to be revived, because it's one of the big industries that contributes to the European Union's economy. More than 6 million jobs are at stake because the tourism industry is been so badly affected. You're talking about millions of people who've stayed at home, airlines have been grounded, museums, hotels, restaurants shut. That's had an enormous economic impact on those countries and, of course, on individual people who rely on tourism for their livelihood. So the European Commission wants to get people moving again, travelling again, but it is that fine balance, because you're trying to revive an economic sector on one hand, but on the other hand, you have to make sure that it is done safely. So they also put out guidelines on how hotels and restaurants should be opening. Things like social distancing, of course, have to be put in place. Hotels are even being told perhaps you need to have special rooms to isolate people who have coronavirus symptoms.
Natacha Butler in Paris, thanks very much indeed, Natacha. Well, Dominic Keynes joining us live from Berlin. Dominic, it sounds to me as though Germany is intending to open some of its borders, but at the same time, the Chancellor has a very cautious note when she's suggesting these things.
Yes, you have to imagine this as two sides of the same coin. On the one side of the coin, you have the government very clearly over the course of the past few weeks gradually relaxing restrictions on the freedom of movement and indeed on shops and other enterprises from doing the business that they would normally be doing if there wasn't the pandemic. So you have that on the one side of the coin, but on the other you have Angela Merkel and her cabinet colleagues and some prime ministers of states of this country all saying, be cautious. Listen to the science, listen to what ministries are saying, observe social distancing, wear masks wherever possible, certainly where it is compulsory to do that, because they don't want there to be a second wave of infections. Insofar as border control is concerned from the German perspective, we have heard today from the Federal Interior Minister, Horst Seehofer, Bavarian Conservative, a key ally of Angela Merkel, saying that certain border controls will go within a few days. So, for example, the border with Luxembourg, controls there will be relaxed very soon. It's possible that will also occur with Denmark, but that still has to be the details, the fine print, as it were, has to be dealt with there still. Insofar as other countries are concerned, though, with France, with Austria, with Switzerland, border controls will be relaxed there, but not until the middle of June. And the other thing to point out here is that other German-speaking countries in Europe are doing similar sorts of things. So Sebastian Kurz, the Chancellor of Austria, today announcing the relaxation of many border controls that could have been expected, as it were, but crucially not with Italy, where Mr. Kurz says that cannot take place right now because of how profoundly deep the problem there still is. And that's something that Mr. Seehofer referred to today as well. So two sides of the same coin. On the one side, the government very keen to relax border controls and other restrictions here, but on the other side, very cautious about informing their population here about what they should be doing.
Dominic, thanks very much indeed.